Thanks so much for joining me again for another edition of 15 Minutes with Father Greg. As always, I'd like to remind you to take a moment and like this video and subscribe to our social media platforms as it helps us to expand what we're able to offer. I'd like to begin by first thanking everyone who has been coming back to Mass. I realize not everyone can right now, but we've been able to greet people over the last 2 weekends at our weekend Masses and weekday Masses. So just a reminder for parishioners, the weekend schedule has changed pretty dramatically. We have confessions heard each Saturday from 2 to 3 p.m., and then we have Mass at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. On Sunday morning, we have Masses at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and 12 noon. And an important reminder that Mass on Saturday at 4 and Mass on Sunday morning at 8, we're trying to reserve those for parishioners who are 55 and older. And of course, we do have weekday Mass, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. So thanks very much for being with us, and we do hope to see the rest of you in the weeks ahead. Please be safe and know that we're doing everything we can here to ensure the safety of everyone who comes to Mass, especially as they receive Holy Communion. So again, know of our prayers for you, and even though we might be still physically separated for a time, we are always united in our Catholic faith. One of the things I wanted to speak with you about in this episode is about saints. Saints are really one of the hallmarks of our Catholic faith. Not every Christian denomination has a great history of venerating saints, as does the Catholic Church, and it's often misunderstood. I want to begin with looking at that great solemnity on November 1st, All Saints' Day. That word all is very important. Some have asked, how many saints are there? Well, when it comes to canonized saints, those who have been officially declared by the Church as being in heaven, being saints, it's somewhere over 10,000, maybe 12,000 or 15,000. It's kind of hard to pinpoint it exactly. But we don't celebrate just those people. We celebrate all who have reached the joys of heaven. And there have to be a lot more than those who are formally canonized by the Church. So all of us are called to be saints. I want to talk a little bit about the process by which someone is canonized. The first step is, well, sad but true, a person has to die. No one can be canonized who has not already died. And then the Church in her wisdom asks for a 5-year waiting period, kind of a window. What that does is allow kind of the dust to settle and for people to be able to take a step back and examine someone's life, kind of free from all that emotion that might be quite intense after someone has passed. Now, the Pope can dispense from that 5-year waiting period. Pope St. John Paul II did, for example, when Mother Teresa of Calcutta passed away. He immediately began the process of canonization for her. But typically, there's a 5-year window that passes before the process begins. And the first phase of the process is local, meaning it happens where the person lived and died. There's a group that is gathered together, led by what's called a postulator, someone who is kind of the chairperson of this effort. He or she will appeal to the local bishop and ask for a committee to be formed to investigate someone's life. And the first step they do is look at, how did the person die? For example, if the person was a martyr, someone who explicitly gave his or her life for the faith, well, that moves things along a little bit faster. But for many saints, they do not die by a martyr's death. Rather, they die naturally. So in that case, there's an investigation as to how that person lived. Specifically, how did he or she live the virtues? And there are 7 virtues: the theological virtues and the cardinal virtues. The theological virtues are faith, hope, and charity. So this committee will look at, how is this person faithful, how is this person charitable, and how is this person hopeful? What did he or she do to exhibit these virtues? The other 4 virtues are the cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Again, the committee looks at a person's life and tries to find evidence of how these virtues were lived. Isn't that amazing? We might think of it as something even grander. How many books did this person write? How many conferences did he or she give? What buildings are dedicated to his or her memory? No, none of that. It's simply living a virtuous life. So, after what could take, in some cases, years, this committee gathers together all this documentation, all this evidence of a virtuous life or a martyr's death. And then that file is approved by the local bishop and then sent to Rome. At this point, a person is referred to as a servant of God, meaning that there's certainly some measure of evidence of a virtuous life or a martyr's death. And so a person immediately receives that title, servant of God. Then that entire file is packed up and sent to Rome for the second phase. The second phase is overseen by what's called the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. The Holy Father, the Pope, has a lot of responsibilities, and so there are different congregations. For us as Americans, we might think of it as secretaries of different departments for the president, the cabinet. Well, the Pope has different congregations, and one of them is dedicated to investigating those who may well be saints. So this Congregation for the Causes of Saints oversees the next few phases. The postulator, that is the person who gathered together and kind of chaired this whole effort, he or she goes to Rome with all this evidence and then works with someone from the congregation to write what's called a positio. That is an exhaustive work that details a person's entire life. Some of these works have been thousands of pages long. It takes those virtuous pieces of evidence and then expands on them, almost like writing a biography, a very intense, exhaustive biography. After that is compiled, and again, that can take a little while, then there's a panel of 9 theologians who read all of this and take a simple vote, that if this case should proceed or not. If this council of theologians approves, then it moves on to the formal gathering of the congregation, which is made up of many bishops and many cardinals. If they deem that there is suitable evidence that this person has lived a saintly life, well then, it moves on to the next phase. They are approved for the beatification process. But before they're beatified, they receive the title of venerable. So the first was servant of God, then the next is venerable. Now, the 2 big phases that remain are beatification and canonization. If, during those first couple of phases, at the local level and the initial part in Rome, it's determined that this person died truly a martyr's death, that is, gave his or her life for the sake of the faith, well, then that person moves immediately into beatification. But for those who do not die a martyr's death, there needs to be an investigation, not just into their virtuous life, but also if there's a miracle attributed to that person's intercession. Now, miracles have often been used as evidence of a person's closeness to God. And so it's really the only way that we could reasonably imagine a person to be in heaven, is that he or she is able to intercede for someone here on earth, and a great miracle, something that is inexplicable scientifically happening. So we might hear about great miracles of physical healing and many others that are attributed to particular saints. So once there's an investigation of a first miracle and it is confirmed, that person may then be moved on to beatification, becoming blessed, as we call that person. Again, miracles are investigated, and investigated very thoroughly by people who are unaware of a person's life, so that way it's truly a scientific process to ensure that there's no explanation beyond God's work and the intervention of a saint, the intercession of a saint in a particular case. So it's a very exhaustive process. And then there is the final process towards canonization. And for both martyrs and those who live a virtuous life, another miracle is required. So for most saints, it takes 2 miracles. For those who are martyrs, it takes only 1 miracle. And all along the way, there are votes taken by this Congregation for the Causes of Saints to ensure that this person's case might move forward. And ultimately, it is the Pope himself who decides, after reviewing all the evidence that's been gathered, to determine whether or not this person has truly reached the joys of heaven and can be declared a saint and placed on the universal calendar for all Catholics to venerate and celebrate on a given day. Some of you might have heard of the expression playing the devil's advocate. That means kind of looking at a situation or a case from a negative standpoint, meaning trying to break it down. Well, the term devil's advocate actually originates with this process, the cause for sainthood. See, there'd be a person in Rome, a theologian or canon lawyer, whose job was specifically to play the devil's advocate, to try to poke holes in the case of someone having reached heaven, someone being a saint. It's not a really great job, but a necessary one, because the church wants to ensure that when she holds up someone for veneration, that person truly has merited such a significant status as a saint. Now, an important thing here, saints are not perfect. No one is perfect except our Lord and his Blessed Mother. So all saints have flaws. Being a saint doesn't mean everything about your life was perfect, which should give us some great consolation, because I know myself, I'm far from perfect. So being a saint doesn't mean being perfect in this life, but that one has been perfected through God's grace in that great purgative stage, and then enter the joys of paradise. So Pope St. John Paul II actually kind of diminished the role of the devil's advocate. In fact, when he did so in the 90s, what happened was the process actually got moved along a little bit faster. And so the Congregation for the Causes of Saints were processing many, many causes for sainthood. In fact, at one point, some remarked that the church was becoming a saint factory, constantly opening cases and turning them around real quickly. And some people were complaining about that all we were doing were causes for canonization. And Pope John Paul II said, well, that's the point. That's what the church is about. We're about becoming saints. So why do we pray to saints? Well, think of it this way, especially for us as New Yorkers. If you're talking to someone and say, yeah, I need to get new carpeting in my house or whatever, a friend of you might say, I got a guy. I got a guy for you. Or if you're new to an area and you're trying to look for a bakery or a store or something, they'll say, I got a guy. I got a guy for you. Well, the same thing happens for us as Christians. If you're sick, you might call a priest and say, Father, can you pray for someone? Or if something's happening, we'll ask a lot of people, please pray for me, pray for my child or my parent. We ask others' intercession for us, kind of like saying, I got a guy. And so we do the same with those who have died and gone before us, who are in that great purgative state, or those who have reached the joys of heaven. And we ask them to pray with us and for us to God. Saints are not mini-gods, not at all. They are humans, just like you and me. But they've reached such a high pitch of existence, of life in the full, of being in that beatific vision with God, that they are able to intercede in a very powerful way for us. And over time, some saints become known for certain prayers. So if you've ever lost anything, you might say a prayer to St. Anthony. If you're in a situation that seems hopeless, you might pray to St. Jude. For us here at St. Gerard Majella Parish, we have a tremendous devotion to St. Gerard, especially his intercession for women who are desiring to become pregnant, for those who are experiencing difficulty in childbearing, and for those whose children might be sick. St. Gerard has become a really important advocate or intercessor for such cases. When we come to a church or a chapel, we might even see these candles here in which we light before the statue or an image of a saint. Again, it's not saying that the saint is on par with God, no. But it is a way of us showing honor to someone who has interceded for us, or someone for whom we are asking a powerful intercession from God. And so when we do that, we are building up what's called the communion of saints. Those who are in heaven, the souls in purgatory on their way to heaven, and those of us here on earth, often called the church militant or the church trying, fighting day by day to grow in virtue, so that one day we all will be in heaven. So remember, that's our job. That's our function in life. Everyone has that same vocation. No matter whether we're husbands and dads, mothers and wives, doctors, lawyers, accountants, bus drivers, priests, whatever we might be, every one of us has the same principal vocation, to grow in holiness, to grow in virtue, and to become saints. Thanks so much for joining me. And again, please feel free to submit your questions by following the link below this video, and I look forward to being with you at Mass real soon. Know my prayers for you and your family. God bless you.